The air in the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale, was a thick, cloying blanket. It clung to me, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and something else. Something sterile and wrong. I'd been pulled out of my self-imposed exile, a reluctant ghost haunting the fringes of a world I'd once dominated, now reduced to this vast, echoing tomb of the forgotten. They'd called it an overwhelming scale because it was. Rows upon rows of stainless steel gurneys, each a silent, stark testament to the city's recent, brutal upheaval. My current gig, a supposed consulting role, felt more like penance. I was here to make sense of the senseless, to bring order to chaos, a task that felt increasingly futile with each passing hour. My fingers traced the cool, smooth surface of a plastic evidence bag. Inside, a single, perfectly preserved white rose. It was pristine, almost an insult against the grim reality of the scene. I remembered that rose. I remembered the sickening artistry. My breath hitched, a sharp, involuntary gasp that felt alien in the hushed reverence of the room. This wasn't just another casualty of the city's recent misfortunes. This was a message. A colleague, their face a mask of professional detachment that I knew was a fragile veneer, approached me. They held a tablet, its screen casting a pale glow on their features. "User SB," they began, their voice low, careful. "We've got another one. Same signature." I didn't need them to elaborate. My gaze was already fixed on the gurney at the far end of the room, bathed in the harsh, unforgiving light of a portable work lamp. The sheet covering the victim was drawn back just enough to reveal a single, meticulously placed white rose, its petals impossibly delicate against the stark white fabric. My stomach clenched. The sculptor. I moved towards it, my gait unnaturally steady, a practiced calm I'd spent years cultivating. Each step felt like wading through treacle, the weight of memory pressing down. The air grew colder, or perhaps it was just the chill of recognition seeping into my bones. This killer, this ghost from my past, had resurfaced, and they had found me. The victim was a man, middle-aged, dressed in what looked like expensive, tailored clothing. But the clothes were irrelevant. The focus was always on the staging, the deliberate, chilling tableau. His hands were positioned with an almost religious devotion, palms up, fingers slightly curled. And nestled within each palm another white rose. The perfection of it all was nauseating. It was too clean, too precise for the messiness of death. "Who found him?" I asked, my voice a low rumble, barely audible above the hum of the ventilation system. "A sanitation worker early this morning," the colleague replied, their eyes flicking from the tablet to the victim, then back again. "He was in an alleyway off the main thoroughfare. No signs of struggle, no forced entry anywhere nearby." No struggle, of course not. The sculptor didn't do struggle. They did art. They did control. They did a terrifying, warped form of perfection. The placement of the roses, the posture of the victim, the utter lack of any extraneous evidence. It was all there, a grim symphony playing out once more. I knelt beside the gurney, my movements slow and deliberate. The scent of the roses was faint but distinct, a cruel counterpoint to the pervasive odor of formaldehyde. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning every inch of the exposed skin. No defensive wounds, no signs of restraint. It was as if the victim had simply accepted his fate. "Anything else?" I asked, my gaze sweeping the surrounding floor, the alley walls, the dumpster nearby. The colleague shook their head. "Clean, like the others, like the others." It wasn't a copycat, it was him, or at least the same mind, the same meticulous madness. My hands, steady moments before, now felt clammy. I had thought I was done with this. I had retreated, buried myself in the anonymity of this temporary facility, believing I had escaped. But the past, it seemed, had a way of finding its way back to I, especially when it was etched into my very soul. This wasn't just about solving another murder. This was about confronting a ghost, a phantom that had shattered my career, my life. And this time the stakes felt infinitely higher. The sheer audacity of the killer, the blatant return after so long, suggested something more than just a rekindled obsession. It suggested a confidence, a boldness that spoke of something far more insidious at play. I looked at the pristine white roses, symbols of purity and death, and felt a familiar, terrifying certainty settle over me. The sculptor was back, and he was painting with a much larger canvas. The air in the vast tent city hung thick and heavy, a cloying mix of disinfectant and something else, something metallic and deeply unsettling. It was the smell of death magnified. This was the disaster morgue temporary facility overwhelming scale, a grim testament to whatever had ripped through the city. Rows upon rows of white-draped forms stretched into the distance, a silent, chilling landscape. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to breathe, to focus. I'd seen worse, or at least, I told myself I had. A curt nod from a uniformed officer directed me to a section cordoned off with yellow tape. It was a smaller tent, a private viewing area if I could call it that. Inside, the scene was starkly different from the overwhelming scale outside. Just one body meticulously laid out in him, Detective Harding. He stood with his arms crossed, a scowl etched onto his face, his gaze sweeping over me with undisguised suspicion. "User SB, is it?" His voice was a low rumble laced with skepticism. "They said I was good, said I had a knack, but this isn't my jurisdiction." I ignored the jab, my eyes already scanning the room. The victim was a man, middle-aged, dressed in a crisp suit. His eyes were wide open, staring at the canvas ceiling. But it wasn't the open eyes that drew my attention. It was the placement of his hands, the way his tie was perfectly knotted, the absence of any struggle. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a statement. The official report mentioned blunt force trauma. Harding continued, his voice clipped. "Straightforward case of robbery gone wrong." I knelt beside the body, my gloved fingers hovering inches above the victim's skin. "Robbery," I murmured, my gaze tracing the pristine condition of the man's expensive watch, the wallet still in his jacket pocket. "Doesn't look like it." I looked up at Harding, my own gaze meeting his. And the hands, they're positioned, almost, posed. Harding scoffed. "Posed, they're dead hands, user SB, they don't do anything." "They do what the killer wants them to do," I countered, my voice hardening. I pulled out my phone, the screen illuminating the dim interior. I began taking high-resolution photos, documenting every detail, no matter how small. The faint smudge of what looked like a specific type of industrial lubricant on the victim's cufflink, the almost imperceptible tear in the fabric of his suit trousers, too clean, too precise to be from a struggle. "This wasn't a robbery," I said, my voice gaining a quiet intensity. "And it wasn't a random act. Look at the precision, detective, the staging. This is about control, about sending a message." I zoomed in on a microscopic detail on the victim's shirt collar, a faint, almost invisible pattern. It was too small to be seen with the naked eye, but my trained eyes, aided by the phone's zoom, caught it. It was a symbol. A very specific, very familiar symbol. Harding watched me, his skepticism warring with a flicker of something else, curiosity, perhaps. "What are I seeing that we're not?" he asked, his tone shifting, the edge of annoyance replaced by a grudging interest. "I'm seeing a story," I replied, my fingers flying across the phone screen, accessing my old, encrypted personal files. "A story that's been written before. This victim, his profession, he was an architect specializing in underground infrastructure." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, just like the others. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of memories, the chilling echoes of a past I'd tried so desperately to bury. The symbol on the shirt collar. It was a stylized A, almost like a blueprint. It was the killer's signature. The same signature from years ago. The one I'd sworn I'd never see again. "How do I know about the others?" Harding demanded, stepping closer. "That information hasn't been released to the public." "Because I wasn't looking at the official reports, detective," I said, my voice low and steady. "I was looking at the real crime scene, the one that exists in the details, the ones everyone else is too busy to see." I showed him the magnified image of the symbol on my phone. This is him, or his method. Meticulously planned, perfectly executed. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle, just death presented as art. Harding stared at the phone, his face unreadable. He then looked at the victim again, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. The sheer scale of the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale, suddenly felt like a metaphor for something far more complex than a city-wide disaster. It felt like a backdrop for something deeply, disturbingly personal. I'm saying it's the same hand, the same mind. And I looked up at him, my gaze locked on his. I think he's back. The tension in the air thickened, a palpable force. This was no longer just a case. Not again. The fluorescent lights of the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale hummed, a sickly yellow cast on the rows of body bags. Harding's silence was a heavy blanket smothering the already stifling air. He just looked at the victim, then at me. A flicker in his eyes I couldn't quite decipher. Disaster. The word echoed in my head, a hollow drumbeat. This wasn't just a disaster, it was a stage, and the performance had just begun. "You think it's him, don't you?" Harding finally asked, his voice a low rumble. I swallowed, the dryness in my throat a physical ache. The staging. It's too precise, too familiar. My gaze swept over the scene again. The meticulous arrangement of the body, the subtle but deliberate placement of objects around it was the signature. The sculptor, my sculptor. Harding rubbed his jaw, his eyes fixed on the tarp-covered form. Familiar how? You've seen this before, user SB. The question hung in the air, laced with suspicion. I'd been trying to outrun that familiarity for years. There was a case, a long time ago, similar MO. I kept my voice level, professional, but inside a cold dread was blooming. Similar how? He pressed. The victims were posed like art. Harding's gaze sharpened. And I think this is him after all this time. I don't know what I think, I admitted, the words tasting like ash. But I know I need to see the old files, the sculptor case. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something akin to understanding in his eyes. All right, but Ire's not going alone. I'll have someone bring them over, and Ire's staying under my watch. Hours later, I was back in my cramped office, the scent of stale coffee and ozone thick in the air. The old files were spread across my desk, a graveyard of a case that had nearly buried me alive. Yellowed paper, faded ink, and the ghosts of victims I'd failed. I traced the outline of a photograph, a grainy image of the first sculptor victim, posed in a way that had made the city recoil. The meticulousness, the sheer audacity of it, had been terrifying. I'd been so close, so sure I had him. And then everything had imploded. A wave of memories washed over me. The late nights, the endless cups of coffee, the gnawing obsession. My colleagues, their faces etched with concern, then frustration, then outright anger. The pressure from the brass demanding results I couldn't deliver. It was all tied to the sculptor. I flipped through a binder, my fingers brushing against a handwritten note from my former partner. He's watching user SB. He knows I read close. I dismissed it then, a paranoid delusion born of stress. Now it felt like a prophecy. A sharp rap on the door startled me. He held a tablet. User SB, Harding sent this, another one. My heart gave a heavy lurch. I took the tablet, my hands trembling slightly. The image that filled the screen was sickeningly familiar. The same subtle, almost artistic, arrangement of the body. And there, tucked beneath the victim's ear, almost imperceptible, was the mark. A tiny, intricately carved feather. What's the mark? I shook my head, unable to articulate the horror that was seizing me. It wasn't just a killer from my past. It was a ghost come back to haunt me. And this time he wasn't just leaving his mark on the victims. He was leaving it on me too. A reminder of what I'd lost and what I was about to lose again. Harding's voice crackled through the comm unit clipped to my belt. User SB, what's happening? You went quiet. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the fear down. He's back, Harding, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The sculptor is back, and he's just given us his second act. The tension in the room ratcheted up, a palpable thing. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a reckoning. The air in the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale hung thick and cold, a cloying mix of disinfectant and something else, something metallic and deeply unsettling. Rows and rows of body bags stretched out before me, an endless, silent testament to the chaos outside. It was a grim tableau, far grander and more horrifying than any scene I'd encountered in my career. This wasn't just a holding pen for the deceased. It was a monument to a city brought to its knees. Harding, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond mere lack of sleep, gestured with a gloved hand. "They're still processing the scene at the warehouse. Forensics are swamped. I needed you here, user SB. The preliminary reports. They're not making sense." I nodded, pulling on my own nitrile gloves, the snap against my wrist a small, familiar sound in the vast, echoing space. My eyes scanned the rows, the sheer magnitude of it all threatening to buckle my knees, but I pushed it down. Fear was a luxury I couldn't afford, not now. "What specifically, Harding?" My voice was a low hum, trying to cut through the oppressive silence. He led me past a bank of gurneys, the canvas covers stark white against the gray floor. "The victim, second one in as many days, same signature." He stopped before a body bag, the zipper a jagged line against the pale fabric. "This is the one from the waterfront, unidentified male, mid-40s, looks like a dock worker maybe. But look at this." He unzipped the bag just enough for me to see. The body was laid out with an almost artistic precision, a stark contrast to the utilitarian surroundings, and then I saw it. The way the victim's hands were positioned, the delicate placement of small, smooth stones around the exposed fingers. Not just similar, Harding, identical. He's not just mimicking, he's recreating. Harding watched me, his gaze intense. "That's what I don't get. Why the stones? And look at the staging. The way his head is tilted, the angle of his torso, it's almost. They weren't just random pebbles. They were smooth, water-worn, each one roughly the same size. And the arrangement, it wasn't haphazard, it was deliberate. "It's a symbol," I murmured, tracing the outline of the pattern with my eyes. "It's a message. He's not just killing them, Harding, he's telling a story." I stood, pacing a few steps, the vastness of the morgue pressing in. The sculptor. That's what the media had called him years ago. A string of unsolved murders, each victim found posed in disturbing tableau-like scenes. Until now. "The first victim," I said, my voice gaining momentum. "The journalist, he was found in the theater. His body was positioned like a tragic figure from a play. And the props, a single wilted rose, a broken violin. This waterfront victim. The stones, the pose. It speaks of the sea, of labor, of something grounded." Harding followed my gaze as I swept it across the endless rows. "You think the staging is symbolic of their lives?" "Or their deaths," I countered, a knot forming in my stomach. "Or both. The sculptor always was theatrical, but this feels different, more personal, more urgent." I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen, opening a secure, encrypted messaging app. This was a risk, a big risk. My past still clung to me like a shroud, and reaching out to certain people could unravel what little piece I'd managed to build, but I had no other choice. "He's evolving," I said, not looking up from my phone. "He's not just repeating, he's building on it. This isn't just about recreating the past." I found the contact I was looking for, a username I hadn't typed in years. Cypher, a ghost from my old life, a hacker with a conscience and a network that ran deeper than any official channels. "What are I doing?" Harding asked, his tone sharp. "Leveraging resources," I replied, my thumb hovering over the send button. The sculptor always left clues hidden in plain sight. He was meticulous, and I was good at finding them, but he also knew me. He knew how I thought. "This isn't just a copy of the past, Harding. This is an adaptation. He's learned, and he's adapting to me." I pressed send. The message was simple. "He's back. Waterfront staging. Need analysis on stone arrangement and the pose. It's different." A moment of silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of the refrigeration units. I felt Harding's eyes on me, a silent question hanging in the air. I met his gaze, my own resolve hardening. "He's not just trying to outsmart us, Harding," I answered, my voice low and steady. "He's trying to break me." This was more than just a series of murders. This was a carefully orchestrated performance, and I was being cast in a starring role I never wanted. The stench hit me first, a cloying, metallic sweetness that clung to the back of my throat. It was the smell of too many bodies, too little time, and a grim efficiency that always made my stomach churn. We were at the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale, a cavernous warehouse on the edge of the city, its usual cargo of forgotten goods replaced by rows upon rows of pale, sheet-draped forms. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile, unforgiving glare on the scene. Harding, bless his stoic heart, had a way of navigating these places without flinching. He moved with a quiet purpose, his gaze sweeping over the tables, the equipment, the grim-faced personnel. I, on the other hand, felt a familiar tightness in my chest. This place was a monument to chaos, a stark reminder of the fragility of life, and it always brought back the ghosts. Anything? Harding asked, his voice a low rumble that barely cut through the ambient hum. I shook my head, my eyes scanning the preliminary reports tacked to a clipboard. The victims, 3 more. Identical staging, identical meticulousness. The same unsettling artistry that had defined the sculptor's previous work, now amplified, more brazen. It was like staring into a distorted mirror, reflecting a nightmare I thought I'd buried. "The MO is unchanged," I murmured, tracing the outline of a diagram with my finger. "The signature is there, but the scale, it's escalating. He's not just taunting us anymore, Harding, he's making a statement." Harding grunted, his jaw tight. "A statement about what?" "That he's untouchable," I responded, the words tasting like ash. "That he can do this and get away with it. And maybe," I hesitated, the thought a cold knot in my gut, "that someone is letting him." That was the whisper that had been following me since the first body turned up. The whispers that had led to my downfall, to the quiet dismissal, the hushed accusations. I'd been too close, too obsessive, and they'd found a way to make me the fall guy. Each drawer held a story, a life abruptly ended. I stopped at one, a number scrawled on a tag. Harding gestured to the attendant, who smoothly slid the drawer open. The victim, another young man, posed with an almost perverse grace. But it wasn't the pose that drew my attention. It was something small tucked beneath his limp hand. A tiny, almost imperceptible detail. A sliver of polished obsidian no bigger than a fingernail. My breath hitched. I'd seen that before, in the evidence locker from the original sculptor case. It had been dismissed as a random piece of debris, a geological anomaly. But I'd felt it, a prickle of unease, a thread that didn't quite fit the narrative. Now it was back. "This," I added, my voice barely audible, pointing a gloved finger at the obsidian shard. "This is his calling card, not the posing. He's leaving us a breadcrumb." Harding leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "Why? What does it mean?" "I don't know," I admitted, a fresh wave of frustration washing over me. "But it's a link, a direct link to the original case. And if this is his signature, then someone else knows about it too, someone who helped him cover it up before." The implications settled over me like a shroud. If the original case had been compromised, if evidence had been deliberately overlooked, then the sculptor had been allowed to operate, to evolve. And if powerful people had been involved in that cover-up, then they were still out there, still pulling strings. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A burner, one I kept for sensitive contacts. The message was brief, cryptic, asterisk. They know I read digging. They knew. The people I suspected, the ones who had buried the sculptor case, were now aware that I was getting too close. He simply nodded, his hand instinctively going to the side of his jacket. "Where?" he inquired, his voice tight. "Somewhere they won't expect," I replied, my mind racing. "Somewhere off the grid." And Harding, I met his eyes, my own hardening with a grim determination. "This isn't just about catching a killer anymore. This is about exposing a conspiracy. And I have a feeling we're about to become targets ourselves." The disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale, with its rows of silent witnesses, suddenly felt like a trap. We had uncovered a truth that some powerful people desperately wanted to keep buried. The air in the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale, was thick with the scent of disinfectant and something else, something metallic and stale. It clung to my clothes, my hair, my very skin. I could still see the rows, neat and unnerving, each occupied slab a silent testament to the chaos outside. But now the silence felt different. It wasn't just grief. It was a watchful, suffocating quiet. "We need to go, user SB." Harding's voice was a low rumble pulling me back from the edge of memory. He stood by the heavy steel door, his silhouette stark against the harsh fluorescent lights. His hand rested on the cold metal, a silent promise of escape. I nodded, my throat tight. The chill that had settled in my bones wasn't just from the refrigerated air. It was the dawning, terrifying realization that we'd stumbled onto something far uglier than a single killer. It was a message, and we were the only ones who'd read it. We slipped out of the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale, into the pre-dawn gloom. The city was a bruised canvas of purples and grays, the usual cacophony of sirens muted, replaced by the distant hum of generators. Harding had a nondescript sedan waiting, its engine a low thrum against the quiet. "Where are we headed?" I asked, buckling myself in. My mind was a tangled mess of faces, facts, and the gnawing unease that had become my constant companion. "Somewhere we can think," Harding said, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. "Somewhere they won't be looking for us. I've got a contact, an old safe house. Nothing fancy, but it's off the grid." Off the grid. The words echoed the feeling that had been growing inside me, disconnected, exposed, and utterly alone. I'd spent years trying to outrun my past, and now it had caught up, dragging me into a present that felt even more dangerous. Harding's contact, a gruff individual who spoke in clipped sentences and eyed us with a weary suspicion, led us to a forgotten corner of the industrial district. The safe house was a cramped apartment above a defunct printing press, the air thick with the lingering scent of ink and dust. "I ran on my own here." The contact grunted, handing Harding a worn key. We spread out the meager evidence we'd managed to grab from the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale, a few hastily photographed crime scene stills, a printout of the encrypted communication I'd intercepted. My fingers traced the pixelated lines of the symbol etched onto the victim's skin. It was the same one I'd seen years ago on a case that had broken me. "The pattern isn't random," I murmured, my gaze fixed on the photo. "Each victim represents something, a failure, a compromise. Someone is cleaning house." Harding leaned over my shoulder, his presence a steady anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. Cleaning house for whom? That was the million-dollar question. The initial murders had been dismissed as isolated incidents, a tragic consequence of the city's instability. But the pattern, the precision, the sheer audacity, it screamed of something orchestrated, a conspiracy that reached far beyond a deranged individual. My mind flashed back to the investigator who'd overseen my original case, the one who'd ultimately discredited me. Had he been involved then, was he involved now? It mentioned a transfer and a location, Harbor 7. It's an old shipping terminal, mostly abandoned. It's also a major hub for unofficial cargo. Harding's jaw tightened. Unusual for a killer to be this organized, this connected. If this isn't just about revenge, then what is it? "It's about control," I said, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening thud. "They're silencing anyone who knows too much, anyone who could expose them, and they're using the chaos as cover." Suddenly, a sharp rap on the metal door shattered the tense quiet. We froze, our eyes meeting. Harding moved silently towards the door, his hand reaching for the worn pistol tucked into his waistband. I scrambled for the back exit, a narrow fire escape that led down into a grimy alley. "Who is it?" Harding called out, his voice low and steady. A muffled voice, distorted by the thick metal, replied, "It's me, the contact. Got some news." Doubt flickered in Harding's eyes and in mine. The contact had been clear, he wanted nothing to do with this. Why would he be back? Harding hesitated for a fraction of a second, then slowly, deliberately unlocked the deadbolt. He was the investigator from my past, the one who had ruined my career. His eyes, however, held a flicker of something unexpected fear. "User SB Harding," he said, his voice strained. "I need to leave now. They know I'm here. They know about the morgue. They know about Harbor 7. My stomach lurched. Betrayal, stark and brutal, washed over me. He wasn't here to help. He was here to deliver us, or perhaps to make it look like he had. "How did I find us?" Harding demanded, his hand tightening on his weapon. It doesn't matter, the investigator pleaded, his gaze darting towards the street. They're coming. I was right. This goes higher than I think. Much, much higher. The evidence I need. It's not what I think it is. He shoved a small, tarnished USB drive into Harding's hand. This is all I could get. It's encrypted, but it's proof. Proof of the transfers, proof of the players. Get it to the right people. Harding looked down at the USB drive in his hand, then at me. What do we do now? My mind raced, the adrenaline surging through me. The safe house was compromised. The investigator, whoever he truly was, had just handed us a ticking time bomb. And the orchestrator of this nightmare was closing in. We had the proof, but no one to trust. Harbor 7, I said, my voice firm, my gaze locked on the grim determination in Harding's eyes. We go to Harbor 7. It's the only chance we have. The night was far from over. It was just beginning. The air inside the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale was thick with the metallic tang of decay and something else. Something sharp like ozone. It clung to the back of my throat, a constant reminder of the sheer, suffocating volume of loss contained within these vast, echoing halls. Rows upon rows of zippered body bags stretched into the dim distance, a silent, chilling testament to the chaos that had erupted. My flashlight beam danced across the polished concrete floor, catching the glint of discarded gloves and the occasional splash of dried fluid. My companion, the investigator, kept pace beside me, his movements economical, his face unreadable in the low light. We'd made it here on a hunch, a desperate gamble based on a whispered rumor and a cryptic piece of data I'd managed to pull before our previous sanctuary went dark. Harbor 7. It was a place designed for anonymity, for the disposal of things best left unseen. And it seemed, for the orchestrator of this whole brutal symphony, it was also a place to conduct his final act. I nodded, my gaze sweeping over the rows of stainless steel gurneys. The pattern, it's too precise, too personal. He's not just killing, he's curating. And he'd want a place where he could have absolute control, where the evidence could be. It was the signature of the ghost from my past, the one who had shattered my career and my life. We moved deeper into the facility, the hum of industrial refrigeration a low thrum beneath our footsteps. I was a forensic analyst, not a soldier, but years of dissecting crime scenes, of seeing the grim details others missed, had honed my instincts. I scanned the floor, the walls, looking for anything out of place, a scuff mark, a dropped item, a disturbance in the ubiquitous dust. Then I saw it. I knelt, pulling a sterile swab from my kit. The investigator stood guard, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. The smear was sticky, not quite dried. I brought it to my nose, a quick, shallow breath, not blood, something chemical, something I recognized from my old lab, from the illicit experiments I'd been forced to witness. The killer, and more importantly, the man pulling the strings, the architect of this nightmare. We moved with renewed urgency, following the trail of subtle clues. A faint scent of antiseptic, stronger here than elsewhere. A small, almost invisible scratch on a metal cabinet. Each detail, insignificant on its own, wove a tapestry of his presence. The investigator's eyes were sharp, missing nothing, but I felt a flicker of unease. He was too calm, too prepared. Was he truly on my side, or was he part of the elaborate charade? We rounded a corner, and the vast expanse of the main hall opened before us. And there, bathed in the stark, unforgiving glow of overhead fluorescent lights, he stood. Not the killer, not the one who wielded the knife, but the mastermind. The man I had once trusted, the man who had betrayed me. He was impeccably dressed, a stark contrast to the grim surroundings. User SB, the mastermind's voice was smooth, devoid of emotion. I knew I'd find my way here. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. I fought to control my breathing, to keep my hands steady. "It's over," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "It's all over." The mastermind chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Over, my dear User SB, it's only just beginning." He gestured to the body bags, a necessary cleansing, a culling of the weak, the corrupt. And I, my brilliant forensic analyst, I was the final piece of my puzzle. The killer took a step forward, his movements predatory. I braced myself, my gaze flicking between the two men. I had the evidence, the digital trail, the chemical analysis of the residue I'd found. But it was all back at the safe house, now compromised. Here I had nothing but my wits and the knowledge etched into my very being. I framed me, I accused, my voice laced with a bitterness I'd held for years. I used my research, my expertise to create this. I was too brilliant to simply discard. So I molded made I a martyr. And now I bring I back to witness the final act of my grand design. He gestured to the killer. He is merely a tool, a precise instrument, but the vision, that is mine. Suddenly the investigator moved, not towards the mastermind, but towards a side door, a distraction, a escape route. My mind reeled. Was he abandoning me, or was this part of a larger plan? The killer lunged. I reacted instinctively, dodging the clumsy but powerful swipe. I scrambled behind a stainless steel cart, the clang of metal echoing through the hall. I could hear the investigator's footsteps receding. Damn it, was I alone? I peered around the cart. The killer was advancing, his movements surprisingly agile for his size. The mastermind watched, a serene smile on his face. I needed to buy time. I needed to create chaos. My eyes landed on a control panel on the wall, a tangle of wires and blinking lights. It controlled the refrigeration units. A desperate idea formed. I sprinted towards it, the killer close behind. He swung again, his fist grazing my arm. Pain shot up my limb, but I didn't stop. I slammed my palm against the panel, then began yanking at wires, sparks flying. Alarms blared, a deafening cacophony. The hum of the refrigeration unit sputtered, then died. The killer roared in frustration, momentarily disoriented by the sudden shift in environment and the blaring alarms. The mastermind's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. This was my chance. I scanned the room frantically. The investigator was nowhere to be seen, but I saw it. A heavy fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. I grabbed it, hefted its weight, and swung it with all my might at the killer's legs. He stumbled, roaring, giving me the opening I needed. I raced towards the mastermind, the fire extinguisher held high. He flinched, his composure finally cracking. "I fool," he hissed, backing away. But I wasn't aiming for him. My target was the table beside him, laden with vials and instruments. I smashed the extinguisher down, sending glass shattering and chemicals splashing across the floor. An acrid cloud of vapor filled the air. "This is for what I did," I spat, the words torn from my throat. "This is for everything." The mastermind coughed, his eyes watering. The killer, recovering, turned towards me, his face contorted with rage. But the investigator was back, emerging from the side door. Not alone this time, he had backup. Uniformed officers streamed into the hall, weapons drawn. The mastermind's face contorted in disbelief. "No, I always did." The game was over, and this time I had won. The air in the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale hung thick and still, a cloying perfume of disinfectant and something far less pleasant. Rows upon rows of silver gurneys stretched out before me, each a silent testament to the chaos that had unfolded. The sheer, unyielding scale of it all pressed in, a physical weight on my chest. I'd seen death before, of course. My work demanded it, but this was different. This was a monument to a madness I'd only glimpsed before, a madness I'd helped to finally, irrevocably end. The immediate threat was gone. The architect of this nightmare, the one who'd twisted my past into a grotesque weapon, was no longer a threat. I could still feel the phantom tremor in my hands, the echo of the struggle, the desperate fight for survival. It was over. The game, as I'd told him, was over, and I had won. The words felt hollow now, a victory tainted by the grim reality laid bare in this vast, echoing space. A colleague, his face etched with exhaustion, approached me. He carried a tablet, its screen casting a pale blue light on his weary features. "User SB," he began, his voice low, respectful. "We've processed the initial data from the site. The mastermind's network, it's extensive." I nodded, my gaze sweeping over the silent rows. How extensive? My own voice felt raspy, unused. He hesitated, scrolling through the information. It goes deeper than we imagined, not just the killings. This was about control, influence, the staged nature of the victims. It wasn't just for show. It was a message, a deliberate dismantling of trust. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw a flicker of something akin to horror. They were targeting key figures, people who could have exposed certain operations. Operations. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. I'd suspected, of course. The meticulous planning, the almost theatrical presentation of each scene, the way the killer had danced just beyond my reach for so long, it all pointed to resources, to a level of access I hadn't dared to fully acknowledge. What kind of operations? I pressed, the hollowness inside me beginning to fill with a cold, gnawing dread. The colleague swallowed, his gaze dropping back to the tablet. Financial manipulation, information brokering, and something far less savory, related to the city's infrastructure projects. Funds diverted, contracts awarded to shell companies. Companies tied back to individuals we've identified as having connections to the victims. And disturbingly, connections to some of the higher-ups in the department. My breath hitched. This wasn't just about a killer with a personal vendetta. This was about a rot that had spread through the very foundations of the city. The killer, my nemesis, had been a pawn, albeit a highly sophisticated and dangerous one, in a much larger, far more insidious game. So, I said, the realization dawning with a sickening clarity, he wasn't acting alone. He was the tip of the iceberg, and the iceberg, it's massive. I turned away from the rows of gurneys, the sheer scale of the disaster morgue, temporary facility, overwhelming scale, suddenly feeling like a metaphor for the entire situation. I had focused so intently on the killer, on the personal battle, that I'd almost missed the forest for the trees. The adrenaline that had fueled me for days began to recede, leaving behind a profound weariness. I had stopped the killer. I had prevented further atrocities, but the victory felt incomplete, a single note played in a symphony of corruption. The personal cost was immense. Yet as I stood there, surrounded by the silent testament to loss, a different feeling began to stir. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was something quieter, more profound. Redemption. I had faced my demons, not just the ones conjured by the killer, but my own. I had used my knowledge, my skills, not for revenge or self-destruction, but to bring a measure of justice, however incomplete. The colleague looked at me, a question in his eyes. What now, user SB? I met his gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. The iceberg is massive, I said. Then it's time to start chipping away. I knew the scars would never fully fade, but for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of purpose, a reclaimed piece of myself. The future remained uncertain, a labyrinth of corruption I was only beginning to comprehend, but I was no longer a prisoner of my past. I was a forensic analyst, and there was work to be done. And this time, I would do it on my own terms. The game might not be entirely over, but I had certainly changed the rules.